Welcome to the heart of Asa Prime, where history sleeps within the ancient and majestic halls of the Continuum Vault. For millennia, these quartz pillars have stood silent, witnessing the rise and fall of civilizations across the stars. Today, 400 worlds converge, a historic union of feathered crests, chitinous armor, and souls with shifting bioluminescent skin. Distances that once took lifetimes to cross are now bridged by a shared purpose, bathed in the vault's soft, regal glow. The air crackles with anticipation as the center of the vault awakens, signaling the start of the great unveiling. Witness the dawn of a new cosmic epoch. The secrets of the continuum are finally revealed to the galaxy. Mireille Aldous stood near the rear of the observation gallery, doing her best impression of furniture. She was 29 years old, 6 months into her first off-world posting, and holding the exceptionally unglamorous title of Junior Cultural Liaison to the Terran mission. A job description that, in practice, meant she filed paperwork, translated Earth idioms for confused alien colleagues, and was under strict repeated instruction from her ambassador to be seen and not heard. Earth had held a seat in the concordance of worlds for exactly 7 years. To species like the avian, ceremonial Isiri, or the crystalline, glacially patient Corveth, humanity was still something between a curiosity and a liability. A species that had somehow stumbled into faster-than-light travel 2 centuries after inventing the airplane, and had been causing minor diplomatic headaches ever since. Mireille adjusted the stiff collar of her formal uniform and reminded herself for the 100th time that morning to blend in. It was, she privately thought, a strange instruction to give a species that had been told gently but repeatedly that it did not yet know how to behave itself in front of company. She had spent the flight out from Earth memorizing 300 pages of concordance etiquette. Which species could not be touched without formal consent? Which species considered direct eye contact a challenge to combat? Which species found human laughter physically painful at certain frequencies and had, on at least one prior occasion, filed a formal grievance about it? She had practiced her Isiri greeting bow in the mirror of her tiny embassy quarters until her lower back ached. She had learned to drink Corveth ceremonial solvent without visibly flinching, which had taken considerably longer than she cared to admit. She had done all of this in service of one single, unglamorous goal: to be forgettable. Competent, polite, entirely unremarkable. The kind of diplomat nobody in the history books would ever have reason to mention. Her ambassador had been extremely clear about the value of that particular skill during her first week on Asa Prime. Humanity's entire strategy right now, he'd told her, over lukewarm embassy coffee, is patience. We let them think we're harmless while we figure out what we actually are. Don't be the thing that makes them look twice. She had agreed at the time that this seemed like sound advice. That resolution lasted until the unveiling began. At the center of the vault, beneath a retracting containment dome, sat what the Concordance's chief curator, a towering four-armed being named Director Osuvane, had spent the last 11 minutes calling the single most significant archaeological discovery in recorded galactic history. The object was a slab of dark material roughly 3 meters tall, matte and light-swallowing, veined with threads of faint amber luminescence that pulsed with something almost like a heartbeat. It had been recovered, Osuvane explained in a booming, resonant voice carried through translation implants in every skull in the room, from a sealed chamber on a dead world in the outer Kesserine reaches, a world that predated every known civilization currently alive by tens of millions of years. It belonged, Osuvane announced, to the kindred, the vanished, near-mythical civilization every species in the galaxy quietly worshipped as ancestors of engineering itself. Their ruins littered 1,000 star systems. Their technology, wherever fragments of it survived, still outperformed anything the Concordance's finest engineers could produce. And no one, not one species, in 11,000 years of trying, had ever recovered so much as a name, a face, or a written word belonging to them. Until now. This, Osuvane said, gesturing to the slab as the containment dome finished its retraction with a low hydraulic sigh, is not merely an artifact. Our preliminary scans suggest it is a repository, a vault of data beyond anything our current instruments can measure. And etched upon its face is something we have never before recovered from kindred remains: a signature. The overhead projection screens flared to life, magnifying the slab's surface to a resolution that filled the entire ceiling of the vault. Mireille's stomach dropped through the floor. Etched into the dark material, rendered in gold that seemed to catch light from nowhere, was a crest, a shield. Inside the shield stood a heron, wings half spread, 1 foot raised above a coiled serpent. Flanking the shield were 2 stylized wheat sheaves. Beneath it, in flowing script, the concordance's translation algorithms were visibly, audibly struggling to parse. She could hear the AI stuttering through 6 failed linguistic matches in the space of a breath. Was a motto. Around her, the gallery had erupted into a low, murmuring hum of scholarly delight. 400 worlds worth of xenoarchaeologists and cultural attachés leaning forward in their seats, already composing, she suspected, the opening lines of papers that would define careers for decades. She heard fragments of translated commentary drifting past her from every direction, a Yasiri delegate 3 rows down, murmuring something reverent about the first true glimpse of kindred heraldic tradition. A cluster of Corveth academics debating in rapid crystalline harmonics whether the animal figure represented a predator species or merely a ceremonial totem. Nobody in that vast, glittering hall had the faintest idea that they were looking at something considerably more recent and considerably closer to home than any of them imagined. Mireille felt strangely, suddenly alone in the middle of a crowd of 400 worlds. The particular vertiginous loneliness of being the only person in a room who understands what they're actually looking at. She didn't need the translation. She had grown up reading that motto stitched into a linen napkin her grandmother kept in a cedar box, along with a small enamel pin that had passed down through 6 generations of her mother's family, from a farmhouse in the Ardennes that had somehow survived 2 world wars, a family Bible with the crest hand-copied onto its flyleaf, and a great-aunt who used to say, half joking, that the family had been keeping something since before there was a France to keep it in. She thought absurdly of childhood summers at that farmhouse, the low stone walls furred with moss, the crest carved crudely into the lintel above the cellar door, worn nearly smooth by centuries of hands. Her grandmother used to trace it with 1 finger every time she passed beneath it. An unconscious gesture Mireille had never once thought to question, the way you never question the habits of the people who raised you until the world reaches in and makes you. Touch it and mean it, her grandmother used to say, half a joke even then, or don't touch it at all. Mireille had always assumed it was superstition, a farmer's habit, worn smooth into ritual the way old habits always were, no different from knocking on wood or crossing yourself in a church you didn't really believe in. Standing in the continuum vault of Aesa Prime, watching a 40-million-year-old monolith project that same crest across a ceiling built to hold the weight of 400 worlds' attention, she was no longer sure it had been a joke at all. Ce que nous gardons bien. What we guard well. It was her family's crest. Down to the angle of the heron's wing, she did not remember deciding to move. She simply became aware at some point that her boots were striking the polished floor of the central aisle, and that 400 worlds worth of eyes, sensors, and optical clusters had turned to watch a junior human diplomat walk toward the most sacred object in the galaxy. "Excuse me," she said. It was not a loud sentence. In the reverent hush of the vault, it landed like a dropped tray of glassware. The Yasiri delegation's crest feathers snapped upright in collective outrage. Somewhere behind her, a Corveth diplomat's crystalline lattice emitted a grinding, disapproving hum. "That crest," Mireille said, forcing her voice not to shake, pointing up at the projection, "isn't a kindred housemark. It's the Aldous family crest. From Earth." Director Ossuvain's 4 eyes narrowed to violet slits, focusing the full, crushing weight of his attention on her. "Terran," he rumbled, translation lagging slightly behind his obvious contempt. "You will return to the gallery. This is a sealed proceeding of significant historical—" "I'm not joking." Mireille stripped off her right glove with shaking fingers and raised her bare hand. On her index finger sat a small, tarnished gold signet ring, the same one her grandmother had pressed into her palm the week before she left for her posting, murmuring something about family luck that Mireille had privately dismissed as sentimental nonsense. "Scan this. Please. Tell me I'm wrong." Ossuvain hesitated. Two armored Vantiri security officers moved to flank her, energy staves lowering toward her chest. Humans, in the Concordance's official threat assessment, were rated low capability and high unpredictability, a combination that generally meant staff kept a respectful, slightly nervous distance rather than open hostility. This was, by every metric the room understood, an act of extraordinary and inexplicable recklessness. "Humor her," Osuvane finally muttered to a hovering drone sounding more exhausted than alarmed. "Then escort her out." The drone swept a pale scanning beam across her raised hand. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then every screen in the vault flashed crimson. Isotopic resonance detected, the vault's central intelligence announced, its synthesized voice cutting through 400 worlds worth of stunned silence. Cross-referencing, match confirmed. Confidence interval. Absolute. The projection split. On the left, the slab's engraved crest. On the right, a microscopic scan of Mirai's ring. When the images overlaid, they did not merely resemble each other. They were identical, down to a hairline scratch on the heron's raised foot. By the deep current, Osuvane breathed, stepping down from the dais so quickly his ceremonial robes tangled around his lower legs. He crossed the vault floor in 6 long strides and loomed over her, close enough that she could feel the recycled air displaced by his movement. "Where did you acquire this?" "It's a family heirloom." Her voice had dropped to barely a whisper. "It's been passed down for, I don't even know how long. Generations. My great-aunt used to say it came from before there was a country to put it in." "Impossible!" snapped a sharp, grating voice. A slender insectoid figure scuttled out from behind the dais, biometric sensors embedded across its carapace, flashing rapid diagnostic patterns. This was Dr. Thessaly Kor, the vault's chief archaeophysicist, a being Mirai had met exactly once briefly, during an embassy mixer, and who had at the time seemed entirely uninterested in her existence. She was very interested now. Earth is a Class 9 hazard world. Its evolutionary conditions were catastrophically hostile. Humans were barely permitted Concordance membership on the strength of your species' sheer stubborn refusal to go extinct. "You are not, you cannot be." "I'm just telling you what I know," Mirai said, defensive now, feeling the eyes of 400 worlds pressing on her like physical weight. "That's my family's crest. I don't know why it's on your relic." "Seal the vault?" Osuvane said abruptly, his tone shifting from wonder to something closer to panic. "Cut the public broadcast. Get her and the artifact to containment level 7, now." Before we go further, if a story like this hits different for you, the subscribe button's right below, and it genuinely helps this channel keep making more. A like takes 2 seconds and tells the algorithm you want more of this. All right, back to the vault. The lab buried beneath the Continuum vault was sterile, blindingly lit, and ringed with sensor arrays that looked considerably more like weapons than scientific instruments. Mirai sat on a cold metal bench, watching through a transparent barrier as Dr. Kor placed her family's ring, 6 generations old, ordinary in every way she had ever understood it to be, into a mass resonance chamber. Hours passed. Somewhere above, her ambassador was almost certainly having some kind of cardiac event over the sudden disappearance of a junior liaison in the middle of the galaxy's most watched broadcast in a decade. Mirai found, distantly, that she couldn't bring herself to care very much. Dr. Kor ran the same diagnostic 3 times, each time chittering something increasingly agitated in a technical dialect Mirai's translator couldn't fully parse. On the 4th attempt, she turned to Osuvane with her mandibles trembling. "Director, the ring's outer casing is terrestrial gold. Ordinary, consistent with human metallurgy from approximately 800 years ago, by the wear patterns." "Then it's a forgery," Osuvane said, though he didn't sound convinced. "No." Dr. Kor pulled up a cross-section on the main display. "The gold is a shell, a later edition, a repair, or a disguise. Beneath it is a core constructed of the exact same photon-absorptive alloy as the kindred relic upstairs. Chronometric decay places that core at 41 million years old." Mirai stared at the screen. "My grandmother's ring is 41 million years old." That is not the anomaly that concerns me, Dr. Kor said, turning back to Osuvane, her voice dropping into an unfamiliar, uncharacteristically solemn register. Kindred technology is genetically locked. It responds only to specific biometric signatures belonging to their direct descendants. That is precisely why we have never successfully activated a single recovered relic in 11,000 years of trying. We are aware, Kor. Director. She swallowed audibly, an odd, purely nervous human-adjacent gesture that Mireille suspected the doctor had picked up from decades of working alongside human diplomatic staff. I brought the ring within proximity of the relic upstairs before we sealed the level. She played the footage. The dark slab, dormant and light-swallowing, sat motionless as a robotic arm brought Mireille's small gold ring within a few centimeters of its surface. The amber veins ignited like struck matchheads. The slab hummed, low and resonant, deep enough that Mireille felt it in her sternum through the transparent barrier. The engraved script across its face began reorganizing itself, shifting, rearranging, resolving into something that looked less like decoration and more like a machine booting up. It recognizes her, Dr. Kor whispered. Director, the biometric threshold. She meets it. She is within specification. Osuvane turned his four eyes slowly toward Mireille. For the first time since she'd interrupted the ceremony, the towering, ancient alien looked less like an academic and more like something genuinely afraid. Humans are not a new species, he said quietly, the realization landing on him like cold water. You are not a fortunate accident that crawled up out of a hostile little world. You are the kindred. You fell. You forgot. And somehow, in the dirt of that terrible little planet, you survived. Mireille sat perfectly still. Somewhere above her in a lab that suddenly felt very small, the entire architecture of everything she had ever understood about her species' history was quietly, irrevocably rearranging itself. If the wider Concordance Council learns of this, Osuvane murmured, and dread had crept fully into his voice now, the Halvern Compact will not merely sanction Earth. They will glass it before your people so much as remember how to switch on the weapons your ancestors left buried in your blood. Glass it, Mireille repeated. The words tasted like ash. You're telling me an entire empire would annihilate my planet over who we used to be. Without a single moment's hesitation, Osuvane said, pacing now, his forearms clasping and unclasping in visible agitation. The kindred were not benevolent architects, human. They were conquerors of almost incomprehensible scale before they vanished. This vault was never a museum piece. We believe, some of us have always suspected, that it was left behind as a warning. If Commander Halvern's High Command learns that the apex predators of galactic history are alive, breathing, and currently negotiating trade tariffs on synthetic textiles, they will not wait to find out what you remember. Dr. Kor was already back at her console, fingers, mandibles, moving frantically across the interface. We must wipe the vault's data logs. We must destroy the ring before... You are not melting down my grandmother's ring, Mireille snapped, stepping instinctively between the insectoid scientist and the resonance chamber to cover up a political panic that isn't my fault. Dr. Kor froze, mandibles half-raised, and for a moment the two of them simply stood there. A junior human diplomat and a Concordance archaeophysicist, twice her age, staring at each other across a bench full of instruments neither of them fully understood the implications of anymore. You don't understand what you are, Dr. Kor said finally, quieter now, some of the clinical detachment falling away from her voice. I have spent 40 years of my professional life studying kindred remains, bone fragments, fused glass, the shadow of a city burned into a canyon wall on a world 3 systems from here. Because whatever weapon ended, it left nothing behind, but the outline of what used to stand there. I have built my entire career on the assumption that they were gone. Extinct. A cautionary tale carved into the bones of 1,000 dead worlds. She gestured, not unkindly at Mireille. And you are standing in my laboratory eating a ration bar out of a foil packet, worried about your grandmother's ring. Mireille looked down. She was, in fact, still holding a half-eaten protein bar she'd grabbed from the embassy commissary that morning and completely forgotten about in the chaos. She set it down slowly on the bench, feeling suddenly, absurdly self-conscious. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said. "No," Dr. Kaur agreed. "I don't imagine you did. That is historically how these things tend to happen. The universe rarely consults the person it's about to inconvenience." She turned back to her console, but her posture had softened, some of the earlier panic replaced by something closer to genuine, exhausted curiosity. "May I ask you something, off the record? Not as the Vault's archaeophysicist, as myself." "Okay. Did you feel anything?" Dr. Kaur asked. "Before tonight? Any sense that you were different? Special? Marked out by fate? The way your human fiction is so fond of describing these things?" Mireille almost laughed, the sound catching somewhere in her throat before it could fully form. "No," she said honestly. "I filed customs paperwork for the last 6 months. I once spent an entire afternoon translating a formal apology to the Assyri delegation because someone on our catering staff served them a dish that was, apparently, an insult to their third cousin's memory. I am, genuinely, the least remarkable person I know. And yet, Mireille agreed, looking down at the ring, feeling its small, ordinary weight in a way that no longer felt ordinary at all. Dr. Kaur was quiet for a moment, her sensor array flickering thoughtfully. "For what it's worth," she said, "I don't think that makes the discovery less significant. I think it might make it more significant. An empire that could rebuild itself in secret would choose its inheritors carefully. Soldiers, scholars, leaders groomed from birth for the weight of it. But an empire that chose to bury its bloodline in ordinary lives, doing ordinary work, waiting generations for an accident of circumstance to bring it back into the light." She stopped herself, mandibles clicking together in what might, in an insectoid face, have passed for a rueful smile. "That is either the most reckless plan in galactic history, or the most patient one. I have not yet decided which. For what it's worth," Mireille said, surprising herself, "I don't think it was reckless either. I think whoever built this plan understood something most empires never bother learning. That the surest way to keep power from corrupting a civilization is to make sure that civilization never quite remembers it has any. Ordinary people don't start wars to prove a bloodline right. They just want to get through the week. Maybe that's not a design flaw. Maybe that's the whole design." Dr. Kaur studied her for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind her compound eyes. "That," she said slowly, "is either the wisest thing a human has ever said to me, or the most convenient thing to believe, if you happen to be the human holding the ring. I find I cannot yet tell the difference. Perhaps, given time, neither will you." Before Mireille could answer, the reinforced doors at the far end of Level 7 shuddered violently. Crimson emergency light flooded the lab as alarms began to shriek. Someone on the other side was cutting through the blast doors with a plasma torch. They traced the resonance spike, Osuvane hissed, eyes wide. "Commander Halvorn commands the Vault's external security cordon personally. If he breaches that door and sees what that relic did in her presence, the execution order for your entire solar system will be signed within the hour." The doors buckled, screamed, and were blown inward by a concussive charge. Smoke rolled into the lab. Marching through it came a squad of armored shock troops, and leading them, a towering figure with pale scarred skin and cybernetic optics that burned a harsh tactical red. Commander Halvorn was, on paper, a nominal ally of the Terran mission. In practice, Mireille had heard the embassy staff describe him, in careful, hushed tones, as someone who viewed humanity's concordance membership as an ongoing administrative error waiting to be corrected. "Director," Halvorn barked, voice modulated and dripping with authority. "You initiated a full lockdown, severed the most watched public broadcast in a decade, and dragged a Terran attaché into a restricted containment level. Explain yourself, Ain." "A containment breach," Osuvane lied, stepping smoothly to block his line of sight. "The relic emitted an unexpected radiation pulse. The attaché was simply in proximity." Halvorn's cybernetic eyes swept past him, landing on Mireille with the precision of a targeting reticle. "Is that so? Then why is ambient radiation reading at 0? And why did my technicians detect a genetic lock interface spike originating from this exact room?" He shoved past Osuvane, boots striking the floor with mechanical certainty, and stopped in front of the dormant slab. "Kindred systems only wake for their own blood," he murmured, almost to himself. Then he turned, and his gaze settled on Mireille, with something between fascination and dawning horror. Terran DNA shares no meaningful architecture with kindred remains. There is no scientific pathway that bridges your species to the architects of galactic civilization. There was something almost personal in the way he said it, a bitterness worn smooth by repetition, the particular fury of a being reciting a fact he had spent his entire life needing to be true. Mireille remembered distantly a briefing document she'd skimmed months ago and mostly forgotten. The Halvern line had built its entire political dynasty on a single ancestral claim, generations old, that they alone among the Concordance's ruling houses were destined to be the ones who finally cracked kindred technology and inherited its authority. Halvern hadn't clawed his way to a commandership out of simple ambition. He had been raised, from birth, to believe this exact moment, the moment the old gods finally answered, belonged to him. Watching it walk in wearing the face of an unremarkable human clerk was clearly not a possibility his upbringing had prepared him for. "I don't know what you're talking about, Commander," Mireille said, forcing a mask of diplomatic calm she absolutely did not feel. "Liar." Halvern drew a sidearm and leveled it at her chest without a flicker of hesitation. "The Halvern line has spent 11,000 years attempting to breach kindred encryption. We have burned fortunes and lives on it. I will not have some clerk from a mud world stumble into what we could not earn. Tell me what triggered the anomaly, or I will have you executed for cosmic espionage before the council convenes." Mireille looked at Osivane, frozen, at Dr. Kor, trembling. No one in that room was going to save her. The Concordance was, everyone quietly understood, more afraid of Halvorn than of anything else in the sector. A strange, unnatural calm settled over her instead. She thought about the motto stitched into a napkin in a cedar box on the other side of the galaxy. "What we guard well." Her family hadn't meant it as something soft. She understood that now, in her chest in a way she couldn't have explained an hour earlier. "You want to know how it works?" she said quietly. Before Halvorn could answer, she turned and pressed her bare hand flat against the slab. Contact did not feel like touching stone or metal. It felt like plunging her hand into charged, living current. A shockwave of raw energy detonated outward from the point of contact, throwing Halvorn and his shock troops against the lab walls with bone-jarring force. The amber veins across the slab's surface ignited into blinding gold. Gravity plating strained and flickered. Loose debris drifted weightless in the air. Mireille couldn't have pulled her hand away if she'd wanted to. She didn't want to. Information poured into her. Not language, not images exactly, but raw understanding, arriving faster than thought. She saw the galaxy not as a map, but as something breathing. She saw the kindred at their height. Cities of light spanning entire star systems. Vessels that fed on the fire of dying suns, a civilization that had conquered disease, hunger, even the slow entropy of aging itself. She saw individuals too, not names, not faces exactly, but impressions of lives lived at a scale she had no framework for. A mathematician who had spent 4 centuries alone charting the geometry of a single collapsing star, patient in a way no mortal creature had any right to be. A gardener. She was almost certain that was the right word, though the concept arrived wrapped in something closer to reverence than the term usually carried, who had tended a forest the size of a continent for so long that the forest itself had begun, in some small and inexplicable way, to tend her back. A child, laughing, chasing something bright and quick through a garden lit by 3 suns, utterly unaware that the civilization around her had already quietly begun to come apart at the seams. It was that last image that lingered longest, because underneath all the grandeur, underneath the towers of light and the ships that drank starfire, she felt something achingly, unmistakably familiar. Love. Worry. The particular ordinary tenderness of adults trying to build something safe for children who had no idea how fragile safety actually was. Whatever the kindred had become at their height, whatever terrible power they had wielded, they had started, once, as something as small and human as a family sitting down to dinner. That was almost harder to carry than the scale of everything else. And then she saw the fall. It hadn't been a war. It hadn't been an invasion. It had been a choice. The collective, agonized realization of a civilization that had built power faster than it had built the wisdom to hold it, watching the fabric of causality itself begin to fray under the weight of what they'd made. The coiled serpent beneath the heron's raised foot on her family's crest wasn't a symbol of a defeated enemy. It was a warning they had written to themselves. They had chosen to dismantle their own empire, scattered their most dangerous relics across 1,000 dead worlds, retreated to a harsh, unremarkable planet at the galaxy's edge, and, deliberately, painstakingly, buried their own genetic memory, generation by generation, so that the power could never again wake before its keepers were ready. The relic wasn't a data vault. It was an alarm clock, and she had just switched it on. "Stop her!" Halvern roared, scrambling upright, raising his sidearm through the blinding gold light. He fired. The round never reached her. A shimmering hexagonal barrier of light flickered into existence a hair's width from her forehead, and the kinetic slug vaporized against it in a harmless burst of heat. Halvern froze, weapon trembling in his hand. "You," he whispered, all the earlier arrogance gone, replaced with something closer to primal fear. "You're one of the old gods." Mireille finally drew her hand back from the slab. The blinding light dimmed, though the artifact continued to hum, low and steady, like something that had simply woken up rather than switched off. She felt different, the anxious, apologetic posture of a junior liaison replaced by something heavier. Older. "Commander Halvern," she said, and her voice carried an overlapping resonance that seemed to vibrate in the fillings of every tooth in the room. "Lower your weapon." It wasn't phrased as a request. His hand opened on its own. The sidearm clattered to the floor. Behind him, his shock troops dropped to their knees, discipline overwhelmed by something in their own conditioning that recognized, on some level older than their training, a chain of command they had no framework to refuse. The relic threw a massive holographic projection into the center of the room. Not a star chart, but a map of Earth, spinning, zooming past the Atlantic, settling on the rolling green hills of a small farming region in northern France. The image sank beneath the soil, past bedrock, past aquifers, revealing dormant shapes the size of mountains sleeping in the dark. An armada, waiting for the blood to remember. Osavain sank to his knees, 4 hands pressed flat against the floor. "Forgive us," he said, voice thick. "We believed you were children." Mireille looked down at the small gold ring on her finger, the same ring her grandmother had pressed into her hand a week before she left, murmuring about family luck. "We were children," she said. "We needed time to grow up without the weapons of our own past, so we hid the keys where nobody would think to look, in our blood." She looked at Halvern, still kneeling, still trembling. "You wanted to know what the crest meant. It means the serpent's still under the heron's foot. It's been there the whole time." "Aldous," he said slowly, "I've just received a flash transmission from the vault. Director Osavain is reporting the relic suffered catastrophic isotopic failure and dissolved to inert dust. Commander Halvern has withdrawn his entire cordon from the sector without explanation." He set his glass down with a deliberate click. "Care to explain how a junior liaison caused a Halvern commander to retreat, and why the most sacred object in the galaxy is suddenly missing?" "There was an anomaly, sir," Mireille said carefully, though her voice still carried that same strange resonance. "The relic reacted badly to atmospheric exposure. It got complicated. I barely got out." The ambassador didn't move for a long moment. Then his gaze dropped deliberately to the ring on her finger. "Is that so?" he said quietly. "And tell me, Mireille, does the serpent still sleep? Or has it woken?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Mireille's breath caught. The faint gold light that had faded from her eyes flared back, casting long shadows across the office. "How do you know those words?" she demanded, the resonance returning fully, rattling the crystal decanter on the desk. The ambassador didn't flinch. He simply unbuttoned his left cuff and rolled up his sleeve. Etched into the skin of his forearm, old and faded but unmistakable, was a wheat sheaf, the exact mark that flanked the heron on her family's crest. "Because you were never the only one keeping the ashes safe," he said. "Sit down, Mireille. We have a great deal to discuss." She sat. He explained, slowly, patiently, the exhaustion of a lifetime of secrecy finally leaving his shoulders. Humanity's discovery of faster-than-light travel hadn't been an accident, not really. Not in the way the history books told it. It had been the end result of centuries of careful, quiet stewardship by families who had known, in fragments passed down through crests and mottos and half-remembered oral history, exactly what they were guarding, and exactly why it had to stay buried until the species was ready to be trusted with it. The Concordance's discovery of Earth had not been luck either. It had been timed, engineered patiently from the inside to occur only once humanity's worst instincts had, mostly, been outgrown. "We knew the kindred cache had surfaced in the Kesserine Reach," Duval said. "We knew Halvorn's people were close to breaching it. We sent you to that unveiling specifically because your bloodline was the one pure enough to trigger the lockout before they got there first." Mireille stared at him, feeling something cold settle in her stomach. "You mean I was never actually assigned to that ceremony by accident? My entire posting, the liaison role, the seating in the observation gallery, that was engineered too." "Not engineered," Duval said, and for the first time something almost apologetic crept into his voice. "Chosen. There's a difference, though I understand it may not feel like one right now. We do not force anyone into this life, Mireille. We simply watch, for a generation or two, and when the moment comes that requires a keeper of a particular bloodline to be in a particular place, we do what any careful family does. We make sure the invitation reaches the right hands. What you did once you arrived, what you chose to say in that hall when every instinct you'd spent months cultivating told you to stay silent. That part was entirely yours. We couldn't have engineered that if we'd tried. Believe me, some keepers, given the same opportunity, say nothing at all. They let the moment pass. There is no shame in that either. Why not? Mireille asked. If the fleet needed waking, if the truth needed to come out eventually, why not simply choose someone who would speak up? Because the fleet did not need waking today, Duval said quietly. It needed to be seen once by the right eyes at the right threshold, enough to remind the galaxy quietly that the old stories were never just stories, without ever tipping into the kind of open revelation that would force our hand before we were ready. What you did in that vault was not the beginning of something, Mireille. It was one very carefully managed exhale in a plan that has been holding its breath for 11,000 years. Halvorn will not speak of it. Ossivine cannot, without incriminating himself for the cover-up he just orchestrated on our behalf. And the wider concordance will remember, if they remember anything at all, a strange technical malfunction, and a junior human diplomat who caused a minor diplomatic headache before being quietly reassigned. He allowed himself a small, tired smile. You did exactly what the family has always needed its keepers to do in the end. You guarded well, and then you disappeared back into the crowd. Mireille looked down at the ring. It had never felt heavier. So we just keep pretending, she said. Let the galaxy think we're children, sit on an armada that could end the concordance in an afternoon, and smile, and negotiate trade tariffs. Yes, Duval said, pouring a second glass and sliding it across the desk to her. Because that is exactly what guarding well means. The moment we use that power to conquer, we become the very thing our ancestors tore down their own empire to stop being. We let them underestimate us. We sell them coffee and steel and smile at their contempt. He raised his glass, something fierce and quiet burning behind his tired eyes. But we sleep easy, Mireille, knowing that if the wolves ever come to our door, the heron is awake, and the serpent hasn't moved in 40 million years for a reason. It's waiting, not sleeping. The Concordance never officially reclassified Earth. Mireille had half expected some grand ceremony, some formal acknowledgement of what had happened in the Continuum Vault that day. Instead, what she got was silence, carefully managed, layer after layer of quiet diplomatic scrubbing until the incident existed publicly, only as a vague rumor about an isotopic containment failure that had cost Director Ossivane his position, and sent Commander Halvern into an unexplained early retirement from active field command. She kept her job. That, more than anything else, was what she hadn't expected. She had assumed in the chaotic hours after Level 7 that her career as an anonymous, forgettable junior liaison was permanently over. That she would either be quietly reassigned somewhere she could never again touch anything important, or, in her darker moments at 3 a.m., simply disappear into some deniable concordance oversight program for the rest of her natural life. Instead, Ambassador Duval had looked at her the morning after, over the same lukewarm embassy coffee he'd used to lecture her about blending in, and said only, "Well, you're not forgettable anymore. We'll have to find a different use for you." The different use, it turned out, was quieter than she expected, and in some ways heavier. She still filed paperwork. She still translated the occasional aggrieved complaint from a Yasiri delegate about the catering, but once a month now, always without warning, always in the evening after the embassy's public staff had gone home, she met with a small, rotating group of people: a Terran shipping magnate from Rotterdam, a retired Brazilian air marshal, an elderly woman who ran a vineyard outside Porto, and who Mireille was fairly sure had, in an earlier decade, done something for an intelligence service she still wasn't allowed to ask about, all of whom wore, somewhere on their person, a small mark she now recognized instantly: a heron, a wheat sheaf, a serpent, coiled and patient, beneath a raised foot. They called themselves, with the same dry, self-deprecating humor she was slowly learning ran in the blood of every keeper she'd met, the family business. She had asked Duval once how many of them there were, how many families, spread across how many countries, quietly holding pieces of a secret so large it could unmake a galaxy. He had smiled the particular tired smile of someone who had been asked that question many times before, and had long ago decided the honest answer wasn't his to give. Enough, he'd said. Not so many that the secret spreads by accident, not so few that it dies with any single family's bad luck. It was designed that way, deliberately. A long time ago, by people who understood exactly how fragile a 40-million-year plan actually is. She went home to Earth for the first time in 14 months on a personal leave the embassy had, with unusual generosity, practically insisted she take. Her grandmother met her at the little regional airport outside Rems, exactly as she always had, wearing the same worn green coat and the same knowing, unhurried smile that Mireille now understood carried considerably more weight than she had ever previously suspected. "You touched it," her grandmother said, before Mireille had even set down her bag, before either of them had said hello. It wasn't a question. "How did you—" "You're standing differently." Her grandmother reached up, cupping Mireille's face with both hands the way she had when Mireille was small enough to be picked up and carried. "Your grandfather stood the same way for about a year after his turn. It fades. Mostly. You learn to carry it quietly." She studied her granddaughter's face for a long moment, something complicated moving behind her own eyes: pride and grief, and something that might have been relief that the burden had, at least for now, passed to someone strong enough to hold it. "Come. The kettle's on. We have a great deal to talk about, and not nearly enough time before you have to go back." They walked together up the gravel path toward the old farmhouse, past the low stone wall furred with moss, beneath the lintel above the cellar door where the crest had been carved, crude and ancient, worn nearly smooth by centuries of hands that had touched it and meant it. Mireille reached up without quite deciding to, and traced the shape of the heron with one finger. She meant it. Behind her, her grandmother watched from the kitchen doorway, kettle steam curling past her shoulder, and said nothing at all, because some things, Mireille was beginning to understand, were never meant to be explained out loud. They were meant to be passed down exactly like this. Quietly, patiently, one small, unremarkable gesture at a time, until one day the person making it finally understood why. Ambassador Duval's warning proved, in the months that followed, to be entirely correct. The galaxy did not stop underestimating humanity. If anything, the carefully managed silence around the Continuum Vault incident only reinforced the Concordance's existing prejudices, a strange, unexplained malfunction, quietly attributed, in the whispered version that eventually made its way around diplomatic circles to human clumsiness rather than human power. Delegates still spoke slowly and carefully around Terran staff, as though addressing gifted but occasionally destructive children. Trade negotiations still opened with the same faint, barely concealed condescension they always had. Mireille found, to her own quiet surprise, that she no longer minded nearly as much as she once had. She understood now what her ambassador had meant, that first week about patience being humanity's entire strategy. Not patience as weakness, not patience as the slow, grudging tolerance of the powerless, but patience as a deliberate generational choice, made by people who had once held the power to reshape reality itself and had chosen, with full and clear-eyed knowledge of exactly what that power cost, to bury it instead. Every condescending glance from a Yassiri diplomat, every faint sigh of exasperation from a Corveth trade minister, every humor her muttered just quietly enough that a human wasn't supposed to notice. She absorbed all of it now with something that felt less like humiliation and more like a private, carefully guarded joke. Let them think what they wanted. Let them keep underestimating a species that filed its own paperwork, apologized for its own catering mishaps, and slept easy every single night above an armada large enough to end them all. What we guard well. She wore the ring on the outside of her glove now, when protocol allowed it. Nobody ever asked why. Nobody in the wider concordance had any reason to look twice at an ordinary, slightly tarnished piece of jewelry on the hand of an unremarkable junior liaison. That, she had come to understand, was rather the entire point. Nearly a year after the incident, Mireille received an encrypted personal transmission with no visible sender, routed through 4 relay points before it reached her private terminal. The kind of message that, in her old life, would have terrified her, and which now merely made her set down her tea and lock her office door before opening it. It was Dr. Thessaly Core. The archaeophysicist had, in the months since the vault, been quietly reassigned to a minor cataloging post on a research outpost at the edge of concordance space, a demotion in every way that mattered, though the official transfer notice had used considerably gentler language. She had never spoken publicly about what she'd witnessed on Level 7. She had never, as far as Mireille was aware, spoken about it to anyone at all. The message was short. I have thought a great deal since that night about what I said to you, about a plan that was either reckless or patient, and how I hadn't yet decided which. I have decided. It is the most patient thing I have ever encountered in 40 years of studying dead civilizations, and I find that I am glad, in a way I did not expect to be, that this particular one was not entirely dead after all. I do not know if keepers are permitted friends outside the family business. If they are, I would like to be considered one. If they are not, please forget I asked, and know that your secret was always safe with me, regardless. Mireille read it twice, then a third time. Feeling something unexpectedly warm move through her chest, she thought about what Duval had told her, that first night in his office. About a plan built not on soldiers or scholars groomed from birth, but on ordinary lives, ordinary kindnesses, ordinary trust extended in small and unglamorous moments between one tired person and another. Perhaps, she thought, that was the actual secret buried beneath all of it. Not the fleet sleeping under the hills of northern France, not the genetic lock, or the armada, or the 11,000 years of careful, patient silence. The actual secret was smaller than that, and had been all along. It was a scientist choosing not to report what she'd seen, an ambassador rolling up his sleeve instead of reaching for a weapon, a grandmother tracing a worn carving above a cellar door, teaching a child without ever quite explaining what she was teaching her. Small, unremarkable acts of trust, repeated patiently across generations, building, slowly, invisibly, one ordinary choice at a time, into something large enough to hold an entire species' future without ever once breaking under the weight of it. She wrote back a single line, and meant every word of it. I would like that very much. Welcome to the family business. Then she closed the terminal, unlocked her office door, and went back to filing paperwork. An unremarkable junior liaison, On an unremarkable afternoon, wearing an ordinary gold ring that had survived patiently, quietly, for 41 million years, waiting for exactly this. Not a war, not a coronation, not the grand return of some ancient empire, but simply one more ordinary person choosing in one more ordinary moment to guard something well. It was, she had come to believe, the only kind of ending a plan like this had ever really been building toward. Not a conquest, a continuation. If you enjoyed this journey into the secret roots of humanity, an ordinary family ring, a forgotten crest, and a galaxy about to learn it misjudged an entire species, hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a good twist, and subscribe for more. What would you have done in Mireille's place? Would you have kept the secret or woken the fleet? Let me know in the comments. What we guard well.